angels waging war in the unseen realm. Global events fulfilling biblical prophecy. Eternal life. What lies beyond mortality? From analyzing the paranormal from a biblical worldview to the discussion of cutting-edge science and technology, conspiracy, discovery, special investigative reports. Unafraid to explore the challenging issues facing humanity. Welcome to another edition of Skywatch TV.
Hi folks, this is Tom Horn coming to you once again from the beautiful studio, the new beautiful studio here at Skywatch Television. We are into week 3, talking with two of my favorite people on the planet, and I want to welcome them back to the studio again today. Timothy Alberino. Of course, I've known Tim for a little while. I've watched him online, but this is the first time we've had the chance to have him in the studio. And then my longtime friend, Steve Quayle. Him and I have gotten into more trouble than you can shake a cat at, right?
Tom, I think there's not a portion of the earth that we haven't infuriated at some point with the presentation of the truth. And talking about the presentation of the truth, as we talk about True Legends, a documentary film series, The Path of the Immortals, Exo Vaticana. One thing that it gets lost in the translation, and I'm not talking from original documents now, is the presence of aliens, is the presence of spiritual entities that have a contempt for the human race and have from the day they rebelled against the God in heaven, the fallen angels. Well, when the fallen angels produce their offspring, the giants, which are called the Rephaim in the Old Testament, interestingly enough, 33 times, either the word Rapha or Rephaim, 33 times. That's kind of the symbolic, ritualistic, occult number. And most people don't even know where that comes from. And when I wrote Aliens and Fallen Angels, the point I was trying to make is that everyone seemed to have an agenda with whatever alien discovery. It didn't matter what show, what documentary, what special that was on, even the docudramas that had been associated, and not to mention Hollywood. Again, we're talking about now spiritual entities leaving their first estate, and this we've got to deal with this right off the bat. Jesus said in heaven they are neither given or taken in marriage, but are as the angels. When you get kicked out of heaven, the angels can transform themselves into even ministers of light. The scripture tells us that. Sodom and Gomorrah, before it was destroyed. Obviously, Abraham, in his imprecatory prayer to God about sparing if there be so many righteous people, those angels looked so normal to him that he wanted them to stick around and have dinner with them, okay? The angel of the Lord, the presence through the Old Testament. The point being is that the disconnect in Christianity is they do not understand that they have the greatest revelation in the history of the world to tell about where is the origin of all this stuff. And instead of being aliens, we're talking about fallen angels, and fallen means they are kicked out of heaven. That's why in the book Angel Wars, past, present, and future, we have the situation right now where the overruling orchestration of evil on the earth, there is a supernatural element to it. And if people can handle this from the beginning of the fall, and God's knowing what's going to happen, providing Jesus for not only our redemption, but obviously in his Savior's capacity of the human race to raise up a standard against hell, there's a battle going on. So Aliens and Fallen Angels is simply the title that I chose to explain to people that they're one and the same. There are still righteous angels, God's holy angels. 2/3 of them didn't buy Satan's lie. But the presence of those angels, if they can morph into different forms and take on the form of a normal human being, how do I say this? It's not a big jump cut to say there are maybe so many of those entities in the earth today that are pretending to be humans, and they're really not. And so when we talk about True Legends, the documentary film series, you cannot separate the fact that the greatest architecture in the world had a supernatural origin. You just can't do it. So as we follow the trail of the ancients, it's really easy to see how that leads to the future. And again, when you understand the history of the world from a spiritual and from a true revelation, the Word of God, versus the false revelation of the ancient aliens that came from this planet. The realm of human sexuality and supernatural sexuality are so linked and so perverted. And that's one of the things that Tim found when he was in Peru and Bolivia and some of the ancient writings. And so when you get into the abduction phenomenon, when you get into any type of dealing or interaction, it's always in a sexual overtone. And that's why I wrote Aliens and Fallen Angels, the offspring of the gods, the sexual corruption of the human race. And that's where people go wrong. They say, well, there's no sex in heaven. We're not talking about heaven. We're talking about fallen angels on earth. And even the ancients understood it doesn't matter what myth, what legend, it's always a gods, hanky-panky earth women. That's the simplest I know how to make it.
Well, and in the last two programs, over the last 2 weeks, how we got to this point was we started talking about this new documentary. You guys have been on the ground in Peru, shooting the True Legends, the documentary film series. This is the first episode, Technology of the Fallen. But this whole question came up about, you know, the History Channel and people over there. They're looking at the same artifacts, the megalithic structures, and they're saying these couldn't possibly have been built by humans, i.e., therefore, there must have been aliens, ancient aliens that came down to the world. And of course, you wrote the book, Aliens and Fallen Angels, which we're making available. You wrote the book, Angel Wars. So if we want to get to the bottom of this, we're talking to the right authorities. But Timothy, you being over there in Peru, you're over there, you're actually walking among those ruins. And you were telling me that among many of the people that live in Peru, they actually believe this ancient alien theory, right?
Yeah, the ancient astronaut theory is prevalent in Peru, surprisingly so. We found that even the young people were familiar with the Greek guy with the crazy hair who's on the ancient aliens program. I don't remember his name. And some of these other guys are well known. And even among the professors that were Christians, they had no idea that there was a biblical explanation for this stuff. And what's amazing to me is that we went obviously to some of the very same sites that have been made famous through the Ancient Aliens program. And I think they do a really good job with some things in that program, so I'm not knocking the Ancient Aliens program, but obviously they're not working from the right premise,
right,
which is the biblical narrative. If you work from the biblical narrative, all the pieces fall into place naturally. You don't have to try and squeeze things in there and make things up and conjecture all day. It all falls together. And so when we were at Pumapunku, for example, in Tiwanaku, I was astounded standing there looking at the ruins at Pumapunku, and there's very little to see at Pumapunku. There's very little there. Most of it's under the ground still. A lot of it has been taken over the years and incorporated into buildings and looted, basically, and plundered. But it was amazing to knowing the conjectures that the ancient alien crowd has made concerning Pumapunku. It's incredible when you stand there and you're just looking at just a little bit of rubble, basically, and they're saying it was a platform for a UFO, saucers to land, and it was an alien base, when all the evidence, all the historical evidence, the Inca, the conquistadors, all points to the world before the flood, giants, fallen angels. That's where everything points to. So it's really ridiculous, really, to come to any other conclusion.
Yeah, by the way, we are going to have a senior analyst from the Pentagon sitting in these seats here in just a few weeks. We're going to be talking about the Islamic State and you know, terrorism and all of that. But you've got a different story about the Pentagon, and you know, talking with you earlier, this whole idea that the Pentagon actually describes some of these aliens as the gods of ancient Sumeria, right?
Absolutely. I was contacted by someone a number of years ago, and he said, you might like to know that we listen to you. And it's funny because he said half the Pentagon likes you and the other half doesn't have any use for you. And I said, well, gee, that's reassuring. But the point is that they talk about the fact that the Sumerian gods are returning. And you can't even begin to look at ancient history, and especially the Chaldean, of Chaldea, of which Abraham was called out of. It doesn't matter if you're Greek, Roman mythology, it doesn't matter if it's in Hindu mythology. And Hindu mythology, really, a lot of it came with the advanced technology, and the Hindus are truly Aryans. That's why Hitler spent so much time in the Himalayas and in India looking for every form of religious or mystical artifact that he could find, even to the point of having Gurkhas by the hundreds brought in because he was told that they had the ability, almost the third eye. Well, where that comes from is actually comes from the mythology of the Cyclops. So saying all that, the technology that's been hidden, I was told by multi-star generals that most people wouldn't even believe they exist in their true rank, that the black budgets, the ultra black, these people, you couldn't find them if you looked, you know, they're hidden. They're hidden with the best way, and they're out looking for the technology of the fallen ones. They're looking for the weapons of the fallen ones. They're looking for the transportation mode. If you fast forward into the contemporary arena, you've got Barry Kamish and others talking about the giants in the Holy Land. You've got all the different races of these, but here's the origin of it. The origin is an unholy union between fallen angels who didn't stay in their estate. In other words, they didn't stay in the heaven that God created. They were originally assigned as watchers. Now, the watchers were those that God put in charge over his creation. I think what St. Augustine said, there's nothing in the visible creation, the world of the visible creation, that angels don't oversee. Well, another word for the watcher, which simply means to observe and report, okay, is the Gregori, G-R-E-G-O-R-I. In the book of Enoch, it talks about the Gregori as being a specific group of watchers that are bound in prison, and they're singing in a Gregorian chant. Now, most people say a Gregorian chant, obviously Pope Gregory and the early manifestation of the Catholic Church, but that's not what it is. They're singing their pleas to God. And see, this is what people don't understand. Jesus died for the human race made in God's image and likeness. That's why Jesus didn't die for the angels. But the angels, knowing of the plan of redemption, wanted to be free from the curse they brought upon themselves by listening to the Prince of Darkness, okay? So now the destruction of humanity is always brought to its it's being brought to its completion because these entities hate humanity. It's because we have something they don't have. Number one, we have redemption through Jesus Christ. But number two, we have God's image and likeness. But the technology is where we've got to go in this because, again, it didn't just, no offense, but primordial amoeba don't just, evolve into rocket scientists, putting not only men on the moon, but putting advanced spacecraft in different galaxies. So, Tim, go ahead and address, if you would, the whole New Republic and how we've got this understanding of marvelous inventions that we're seeing now, but from 400 years ago.
You mean the New Atlantis?
Yes.
Francis Bacon.
I said New Republic.
Well, and isn't that I mean, when you were in Sardinia, you're looking at what appears to be the remains of some kind of technology that we can't even begin to comprehend. And you had, in the last program, mentioned that there are even those who believe that Francis Bacon's New Atlantis might have been based on some of the technology in Sardinia, right?
Absolutely. And I have to give credit to Chris Pinto and his fantastic documentary film, America's Beginnings. That really got me to dig deep on Francis Bacon. And Francis Bacon is really the key to unlocking so much of what America was supposed to become, according to the occult, according to the Rosicrucians and the secret societies.
Right.
And Francis Bacon wrote the book The New Atlantis in 1626, which was basically a book about a utopian society called Bensalem, which means son of peace. And in Francis Bacon's book, which was again written in 1626, he details some secret technology that this secret society was in possession of, the society that ruled the island of Bensalem. Now, it's important to understand that the island of Bensalem, it's a fiction, obviously, by Francis Bacon, is an island that existed contemporaneously with Atlantis, which Francis Bacon believed, well, at least he says in his book, The New Atlantis, was North America. In other words, what was to become the United States, that was the location of Atlantis. And coincidentally, it was connected with, Atlantis was connected with Central America and Peru specifically, which is very interesting. But anyways, Francis Bacon talks about, in The New Atlantis, he talks about technologies that he could not have possibly had any idea were coming. For example, he talks about deep underground facilities 3 miles down, skyscrapers half a mile high, wind and water turbines, artificial atmospheric devices, electrical devices, genetic labs, industrial manufacturing, lasers, powerful telescopes, spectacles for the eyes, magnifying glasses, audio amplification, advanced firearms and missiles, flying machines, submarines, and holographic projections.
Yeah, well, so would you think that maybe he had tapped into some kind of an occult knowledge?
1626 he wrote this. He was a high-ranking, if not the leader, of the Rosicrucians.
Right.
And his
and many people believe that he was actually he was the idea behind the founding of the way our government functions, the occult layout of Washington D.C. That they were European devotees, right, to an occult plan.
And in Chris Pinto's fabulous documentary, he shows that Francis Bacon was in charge of the colonization scheme.
Right.
He's the one who sent over.
Well, there's a Newfoundland stamp from that era
Francis
that
Bacon.
Actually has a picture of him saying that he was the founder.
That he was basically, he was in charge of the colonization of the United States. And so it's incredible because Francis Bacon is called the father of modern science. You know, the scientific method, he's the one who really was promoting the scientific method, but he can also be rightly referred to as the father of modern esotericism, which people don't realize that this is a guy who's the father of modern science on the right hand, but on the left hand, he is so steeped in the occult, connected with spirits that he admits, you know, the muse that he has, the Athena muse that he has, and all these different entities which he claims to have gotten information from. And he was the protege of John Dee, who was an infamous sorcerer. Sure. And so these guys, Francis Bacon, John Dee, the Rosicrucian Order, the mystery schools, their whole deal is to be in connection, to be connected with what I call the empire of the gods, which was the pre-flood world, with those entities, with that world, with that technology. And so surely he knew these technologies were coming, not because he was looking forward, but because he was looking backwards.
Amen.
And here's the thing that a lot of people wonder. They say, okay, let's say for a moment that we buy this idea of aliens and fallen angels, that angels came down, that these powerful watchers came down, and because they were, you know, they were watchers, they knew an awful lot about technology. They could have been some of the progenitors of some of this technology that led to the building of the megalithic structures and these giant walls. There's stairways over there that you were walking along. They call them the giant, whatever they are, stairways that, you know, had to be a giant to walk on them. I mean, one of us, we got to lean over and get on one, walk a little ways, get on the next step.
Take a 12-foot ladder along with you, you know?
So those structures, all of that is there. But what a lot of people say is, what did the watchers want? I mean, why did they come down to the earth in the first place, Steve? What is it that they were trying to do? What pushed their button?
Well, what pushed their button was basically the rebellion that had existed, and obviously 200 of the watchers descended on Mount Hermon and said, let us take these for wives, the women for wives. And the whole point was to genetically corrupt the human race so that the promise of the Redeemer, our Lord Jesus Christ, could not come. When it gets down to it that Noah was the only one in his family who were perfect in their generations, it wasn't a comment on their moral perfection, but it was their non-tampered DNA. And the fascinating thing about the knowledge of good and evil, that was the fruit, okay? The fruit of the knowledge of the tree of good and evil is what was the alluring thing. And with it came all of the sexuality, and even the preferred sex of the fallen angels was homosexuality. And they preferred the company of each other. Diodorus, the famous, if you will, chronicler and historian, quasi-historian, wrote about that. What we found even in Peru were the most profound references to that whole issue, that God literally from heaven sent a shining angel and destroyed the giants, because, you know, even in Native American lore, it's the same thing. The giants took after. Now, a giant cannot size himself accordingly, and they raped the women to death. And then even though in some of the historical accounts it said, though they have comely women, meaning pretty giants, giantesses, they didn't want the giantesses, they didn't want the women. They went after each other. So the fascinating thing that we're finding, and I'll let Tim just kind of give the illustration of that, is that now we're not only seeing the religion of the giants, the technology of the giants coming out, the fallen angels. What is it they seek to do? Well, with abortion, you're killing off entire generations, so there are not going to be any human beings that you have to deal with in the future. With all the diseases that are coming in, it's more than Pandora's box, okay? It is the launching it, the assault into the realm. And this is what people don't take Jesus serious about. Jesus said if he did not shorten the days, there'd be no flesh left alive. And they used to think that with the nuclear weapon, that was the weapon that would kill everything. No way, wrong. Then the bottom line is that the biological engineers, and I wrote a book about that years ago, breathed no evil, and people couldn't even understand then why that was relevant. So I'm saying all that to say this, that it was a time seal on some of the data and some of the manuscripts that Tim received when he was given those documents that was so supernaturally timed that I don't believe you can say, boy, you talk about the fingerprint of God, his thumbprint, his handprint was all over it.
Yeah, I mean, actually, you know, anybody who's watched the last 2 weeks leading up to this program are aware that you were blessed by God, doors open. I don't believe you went over there and you just happened to be at the right place at the right time. I think the whole project was anointed by God. You were given favor. I mean, you were given access to documents that I'd never heard anything about before. You wound up speaking at a college over there and sharing with some of these kids, maybe for the first time in their entire life, a biblical worldview that explains this phenomena that they live around, and they believe that maybe it was aliens that came here. Of course, we're talking about the documentary True Legends, the documentary film series. This is brand new. This has not been in stores before. In fact, it's probably not in stores yet. We're the very first ones that have had an opportunity to interview you guys. This was boots on the ground, large budget production scale. You were over there. I saw images of you scooting about on motorcycles, riding places where you couldn't even take a car, right? And this is episode number 1, Technology of the Fallen. Now, right now, David Flynn, who was a mutual friend of ours, died very young. He was a genius. He was one of the first ones that started talking about some of the artifacts there in Tijuana and other places. And we put together his collective writings, a book that you had published, a book that I published, and then articles that he wrote. And we are making that available with the documentary film True Legends. That's a $60 value. We're making that available for $39.95. Of course, you can get the documentary by itself in our store for $24.95 at skywatchtv.com, and just click on the store link there, or go to skywatchtvstore.com. We're also talking about aliens and fallen angels. We are talking about angel wars. We are going to be talking about next week xenogenesis, and we're making these 3 books also available. Boy, you got to have muscles to pick up Steve Quayle books.
Well, see, you can read and get your work out at the same time.
But, yeah, these 3 books, these would normally retail together for $128, but we are making those available for $99, and we're throwing in another book by Steve Quayle, which is an $18 book. So this would normally be about $130.
And in the Long Walkers book is the actual letter of the pilot who never believed in giants until he was asked to fly a dead giant out of Bagram Air Force Base in 2005. And absolutely, it blew his mind. And the story, the letter's in there, Tom, and we'll be, showing people the screen image of a artist's rendering of it. But just since that time, just to wet everyone's whistle, even more validation of not just that instant, but other instances where there are live giants. That's the difference between what we're doing. Yeah. People need to know that we're on the road to the live ones.
And you actually will. You have somebody in Hollywood that's producing a recreation of the 36-foot tall skull, the giant who had a skull that would have made him that tall. Well, folks, you can get the documentary from us. You can get the Aliens and Fallen Angels collection, 4 books there that would normally be $128 for $99. If you want to get all of this stuff, the DVD, all of these books together, that would be a $190 value. You can get that during these programs only, exclusively through us at that deal for $129. And we're going to be back next week talking about xenogenesis. Gentlemen, you have about 20 seconds to tell me any final comments you want to make about the documentary or what we've been discussing today.
The documentary will help people to understand the beginning, and it will even show them what's to be expected. And Jesus said, just as in the days of Noah, so would it be in the days of the coming of the Son of Man. 99% of people only equate a great flood with Noah. They have no clue of what's coming, and we're doing that.
All right, folks, join us next week on Skywatch TV.
Coming this November.
I'm not sure that the world is ready to receive this.
Tom Horn. Joe Ardis, Donna Howell, and the Skywatch investigation team join a host of global experts in the conclusion of a multi-year undercover inquiry that exposes what the U.S. government, the FDA, and monster corporations have been hiding from you.
We're talking about everything from the food that we eat, to animals and pet animals, to ultimately humans. Literally, what we have been doing with genetically modified crops, what we have and are doing with transgenically made animals, we fully intend to do with the human race. I mean, how many people know right now that the last scientist in Congress, Bill Foster, recently spoke before Congress. He wrote an article for The Hill in which he says that right now the top science departments in our government that dole out taxpayer-funded revenue have already been ordered to literally create the guidelines that are going to be used for genetically modifying the human race.
I think 90% of Americans would be shocked if they learned that their cats and dogs were eating these diseased meats and euthanized pets.
During our investigation, we were able to verify that if your pet Fluffy had been euthanized at one of these vet clinics or one of these shelters, it would be recycled into food byproducts, toothpaste, cosmetics, deodorant.
The stench is overwhelming. It's unbelievable.
Coming in November, an unprecedented, official and imposing undercover report that exposes what government agencies and greedy corporations are hiding about a genetic menace that is slowly, quietly, secretly killing and transforming all of creation.
They have made a Faustian deal with the devil. I'm talking about our government. They have sold out the best interest of Americans to greedy monster corporations that are in their back pockets.
Coming this November exclusively from Skywatch TV. Dead Pets Don't Lie. Inhuman the documentary. Survive the Future.
The supernatural realm is real, and we humans are naturally curious about it. That's why there are so many television reality shows featuring ghost hunters and alien chasers and mediums and psychics. Well, by and large, the Christian church avoids these controversial topics, even though we have the authoritative book on the subject. That's our mission at Skywatch TV, is to address issues of the paranormal and the supernatural from a Christian, a biblical perspective. But we depend on your support to do it. To find out how you can support Skywatch TV prayerfully and financially, please log on to our website, skywatchtv.com. And keep watching as we keep watch at Skywatch TV.